Good afternoon, everybody. It's gubernatorial candidate Jon Collamer here. Today we're going to be talking about wealth. It's on a lot of people's mind. The economy is always something that's very dear to people's hearts because people always want to have enough money. And money is tied directly to safety and to healthcare and to food and to housing, utilities, clothes, stuff like that. So I want to talk a little bit about where we're challenged in this area and where we can go forward and offer some solutions. And I want to talk a little bit about the history of wealth because I like history and I've just been reading books and stuff lately. So this one is from a history from the Buckminster Fuller, and he was an old visionary and invented a bunch of these dome structures and was a really great writer and went to Harvard and kind of didn't necessarily make success in his life and his own idea and inventions, but he inspired like thousands of other writers and engineers and people to make the world a better, more ecologically efficient place. He saw these structures and lost his mom to like pneumonia or something, so he wanted to make these really efficient structures. And so the domes were the most efficient way to trap air and to recirculate it and to heat it up with the sun, and didn't really have to have any, heating or cooling because it was built in just to the structure. And that's one of the things with a lot of these buildings that we have, especially if they're corporate, right, or commercial, and they just pop them up real quick. Well, unfortunately, it's usually not done with the most amount of efficiency thought about, and so a lot of the insulation and stuff isn't that great. So you're spending 10 times as much on your utility bill because it's just going out the windows, and the heat's just no double pane windows, there's no insulation in the walls. So that's one of the things that we should look at, is make things more efficient, right? And that's tough in a system of capitalism because we have what they call planned obsolescence, or not obsolescence, planned obsolescence, right? I think from what I learned, it's basically most products have a built-in lifetime when they are gonna basically need to be repurchased and reinstituted and recalibrated or whatever it is, from whether it's your alternator belt or a light bulb or a USB cable from Apple. The cool story that I read was that one of the inventors of the light bulb came up with this awesome light bulb, and it would last like 90,000 hours. And they're like, 90,000 hours, you did a good job, but can you make one that lasts 20,000 hours? And he's like, why would I do that? And they're like, gotta make some money, boy. So the economy and money is not always directly represented in the most valuable and most efficient means of production, right? The automobile engine is about 30% effective. I think then there's like turbines that are like 60%, like jet engines are like 80 or 90, but very inefficient in our system of transportation and technology and politics and food, agriculture, medicine, privatized jails. Everything is just very inefficient. So I would like to bring more efficiency to the world, and I studied a little bit of the energy efficiency because my dad had a company called Lightworks back in the 70s where he traveled around Colorado and would sell like hot water heaters and like wood stoves and stuff. The Good Earth Project book he'd read and go around, and he was really into making the world a more efficient, better place. He loved camping and kayaking and skiing and traveling the world with his Subaru Outback and everything, and he'd read his book and his poetry and philosophy and write his trip reports and send them into magazines for hot springs and everything, and just really cool cat. So basically, yeah, wealth, right? So you go back to the history of wealth, and the Buckminster Fuller book, he was saying that we used to use cows as actually currency. So when you went somewhere or something, somebody would have your cows, right? And you need to borrow money for a ship or some army or something or some kind of technology or food. You could let them borrow your cows, right? So they have 10 cows and you go away for a year. Say those cows have 5 calves. Those calves were called in-kind donation. That was basically the interest. The interest was the newborn calves that we had. So that was the collateral or the catalateral, whatever it was, right? So that was basically the understanding, and it was pretty crazy because I read about these ships that were like, I don't know, hundreds of feet like wide and long. They had like a couple hundred cattle on there, maybe 1,000 or two, and they just go across the ocean with these giant sails and everything and come into ports and places and trade all their livestock. That's why it was livestock. It was cattle. It was worth something because they could use it for food, right? And after that kind of went away, right, we got into more of the gold and the coins and the paper and the other currencies, then there wasn't any more interest to be made on those currencies, right? Because dollars don't have more dollars, right? They don't give birth to more dollars. Gold coins and silver coins don't give birth to more gold and silver coins, right? So basically that went away and banks came in, right? And the people who owned the means of basically loaning out loans, loaning out money, loaning out wealth, loaning out agricultural equipment, financing armies and wars and arms and that kind of stuff, came down now to just like paper. And even before that, the coins, right? Rome had a bunch of these coins, gold and silver coins. And after a while, they'd have whoever's had theirs, right? Caesar or Ptolemaios or, I don't know, Heraclitus or something. Oh, he was a philosopher, he probably didn't get a coin. But people would start cutting off like the sides of the coin, right? Like clipping them off a little because it was real gold or real silver. And now you look at our coins. I just looked at a new coin. There's not even a date on the quarters. And I don't think they're made out of any even metal. They feel like plastic or something. And so there's just no more actual even worth in the coins, right? So now, let's go back. So Socrates, he said one of the only sins that he thought was basically having a life that doesn't create anything new, right? And so many people are upset at the financial system because banks don't create anything. They just take money that they already have and then they loan it out to everyone else at fractional reserve and then make 10 times as much. He considered that a sin because life is a gift, and if you're not giving, if you're not creating, if you're not giving and receiving in part of that flow process, then you're sort of stagnating and you're hoarding, you're grabbing all that wealth and everything, and I'm just gonna hold it because I'm scared, and probably not the best way to live, right? It's nice to have money in the bank, but it's not nice to be so tied to that money that you are not a human being without it, right? Or that it changes your character. Isn't that the saying? You make the money, don't let the money make you, And that's the idea. A lot of people get money, they think they're better than other people now. They put up a bunch of hedges and a bunch of locks and a bunch of walls and a bunch of gated communities. And then they get all lonely because they think everyone should just recognize that they got this money now and they're wealthy. And true wealth, we can talk about, that's philosophical. But so let's go back to the banking system, right? And whether or not Jesus was a real character or not, that was one of his main complaints also with the Roman government at the time. And Caesar, his head was on the coins, right, and stuff. And then Jesus like, my kingdom's not from here, it's a spiritual place. And then they're like, well, ours is, And then he's like, yeah, usury you shouldn't have. I'm not sure if it's usury or usury, but I think it's probably usury because it sounds like you're using somebody. And then usury was basically charging more than like 1.5%, which people, I think, in the Nation of Islam consider that a sin, and Christianity. And I think all religions consider usury a sin, except for maybe the Jewish religion. I'm not sure. And that's not to be racist, but they're just so good at banking and stuff. They might have moved the numbers around a little, and they're like, yeah, usury, smoogery, boozery. And then they put, I think, Mr. Jesus up on the cross because he was trying to get people into the wealth and the divinity of your spirit and of your heart and of your body and of being alive in this miraculous thing we call life, And that's why he hung out with the poor and the drunkards and the people with leprosy and give us your poor, your weak, your huddled, and the weak will inherit the earth. And the whole idea with, a rich man cannot go through the eye of heaven on a camel. I think that comes back to the thing in like maybe India at that time where the buildings, they weren't big enough for a camel to go through. So it was actually the camels that had all like the gold and everything. And they were like, we can't get through. Can't make it through the fucking eye into the heaven, And that basically just says because you're taking away from the divinity of yourself. You're taking away from the kindness of yourself. Some people get more kind with more accumulation of wealth, but most people don't. And so how can we teach that kindness of character, that respect for the gift of life, and to build skills into who you are, instead of just get a big bank account, buy everything, and then be depressed? So, wealth, right? Let's go a couple years ahead, a couple 100 years ahead, 500 years ahead or something, or 1,000 years up to American, And we're over in America, right? And we came over here and basically fought the British off and said we want our place where we can speak what we want and worship who we want and, not pay these taxes to a king and everything who doesn't give us anything back. And we borrowed money from France to do this. And France, I think what I understand, loaned money to Britain and to the United States. So France was like, or whoever was it, the Rothschilds or the Vatican or something, was like, let's loan these guys both money. They both need them, and then if one of them wins, we win. So they just hedge their bets, right? It's called, where you basically just cover both sides, and then you win either way. That's the way most wars are funded and fought in most politics, whether you're Democrat or Republican. Look at who funds these politicians. Look at where they go to school. Look at where they go to the colleges. Look at the BlackRock and the State Streets and the Vanguards and all the Citibanks and the JP Morgans and the First Bank. They're all funded by the same people. You can think that they're different, but the red team and the blue team are both funded by the green team. And that's one thing I think is kind of exciting about this, or really exciting about this campaign for me, is I'm not a person who came from money. My father had money, he had a trust fund, so I saw how he had some of the money, and my grandfather made it during the Great Depression, got a loan from some people and was able to loan them money for, small trailer parks and stuff like that. So from what I learned about money was it takes money to make money. That's the whole saying, the rich get richer, the poor get poorer. There's not really a civilization that takes money away from the rich and gives it to the poor, and the poor really even know what to do with it, right? That's the whole idea of socialism or communism, right? Like Mao took away all the farmers' rights and all the educated people and the intellectuals and stuff like that, and just the people who were successful, and he gave it to all the poor people because he wanted to redistribute the wealth. But the poor people didn't know how to farm, and so the farms went under and everybody starved. 40 million people all died because that's the idea. You want to make the playing field as level as you can, but you can't expect the evolution to be fair. That's what America tries to do. We try to make the most fairest thing, and then you let the people fight it out. That's all there is. So it's fight, brute force, fight. And money is a form of that brute force. So this campaign for me is really exciting because I feel like I'm more of the people's candidate, like Phil Wiseman. He just raised like $2 million, I think, $2 million in like a month or something. And Mike Bennett has a bunch of money from being in the Senate for like 20 years and stuff. And nobody's bad people if they have money, good or bad people. I know people who have money and they're awesome people. But these are not people who have allegiances to the working class or to the poor or to civil rights actions. Their allegiances lie to their party. And that's why we've turned into this dystopia of political absolutism and narcissism, where it's these factions just so toxic, just fight at each other and butt heads, because everyone up here, the actual people behind the scene, they just keep watching them fight, and they're like, this is great, There's an old saying that the kings and the queens would look over they'd look over the rock wall and be like, hey, how is it going out there today? And they're like, oh, yep, they're all fighting. Okay, that looks pretty good. That's great. Let's go back in. And then they'll come out the next day, but hey, how's it looking out there? Oh, I don't know, they're all talking and stuff. They're kind of like talking together. And the king can be like, oh shit, this ain't good. So unfortunately, when we talk about freedom, we think it's actually true. Over in Britain, they locked people up recently for posting things on social media that had to do with religious ideologies that were different, something like that. Locked people up. I saw it with my own eyes on the TV. They came to these elderly people's houses and they're like, yeah, you can't write this stuff on your social media, it's hate speech. And they locked them up. And to me, that's the reason that we got out of Britain, is because we didn't want somebody coming to our house and saying, you don't have an opinion. Our opinion, we're going to give it to you. And that's what people in North Korea do, right? They give you a nice opinion of a nice little, magnum in the head if you leave. And in China, there's not much freedom of thought, creativity, innovation. Sure, they got 300 billion people, right? 3 billion people, so they could drop people on us. They got so many people. But our economies are interlinked, so there probably won't be a war with China. It's usually exacerbated, and the whole Chinese virus and all that whole flu thing and stuff, we probably learned that was more of a kind of continuation of efforts between powers that be to keep the powers that be in power and to divide the public, and they did a great job. No better way to divide people than say, you don't follow science, you follow science, you don't follow it, oh, you're so ignorant, you're so stupid. It destroyed the middle class in America. The whole bullshit for the pandemic, and people don't realize that they destroyed the middle class, biggest wealth transfer in history, like $500 billion or something. None of those businesses are coming back, by the way. Kids who are going to school lost their chance to graduate, their chance to enjoy the social activity of school, which is the number one reason you go to school, because education surely ain't that great. So the social aspect, they lost that. Babies who were being born, they masked up, which messed up the respiratory system, and they couldn't read people's lips, because if you cover the mouth with you couldn't read my lips. So how do you learn? So these babies are stepped back and reverted back, and their communication and understanding, because body language is actually 90% of communication. What? You see all those facial expressions and stuff that we do? There's like thousands of muscles in the face. That's why AI can't even figure out, the face, like match a cat with a cat, or move a face to the orange part, It's like artificial general intelligence is that smart. It can't even pick two faces out that are the same, or two A's or two cats. So I don't think we have to worry about it too much. But speaking of wealth displacement, the technology definitely will not create more jobs. It will create some jobs, but it will also destroy a lot of jobs. And a lot of these jobs, it's good that they're going to be destroyed, like a lot of the lawyer jobs, because if you look in the phone book and every page under attorney in A, it's like the biggest part of the phone book. And unfortunately, that was that thing we talked about before. More laws don't make a lawful society, just like more lawyers don't make a better followed morally ethics society. It's the opposite way, because most lawyers unfortunately don't have that many morals. They're just going for the chasing ambulances, right? Or being a prosecutor, or being just a DA. The public defenders are pathetic as hell. Anywhere you look at them, bless your souls if you are one, and I'm sure you're trying to do a good job, but the ones I've interacted with are very low educated, low paid, and just low quality. So, no motivation for money, right? So we move forward to America's history. We had a war, we borrowed some money from France loaned both sides. We move forward to the Civil War. The Civil War started, why? Wealth displacement. The South was using cotton and using slavery to make a lot of money, and then the North was also using that cotton and that slavery to make money, because industry is all interconnected, right? Whether you had like a factory, or you were a farmer, or you were making cars, everything was interacted, so we can't really separate it. And so for me, the Civil War was more about economics than it was about the hatred of a class of people. And that is something that people will have a lot of different ideas about, but we go back to the idea of a rising tide raises all ships. If we didn't depend on the economy, we wouldn't have created slaves. So it's sort of this paradox that people don't want to believe or understand, but America only became America because of the slavery at the time. Now, is that right or wrong? I don't know. It's just a fact. And Britain had slaves 20 years before that. And then everywhere else in the world, there were slaves everywhere. There were slaves in Portugal. They started the sugar trade by moving more slaves around to South America and here and there than we even had in America. Africa, the kings and the different tribes had their own slaves. So slavery is not a European or a white invention, Did we do it in the early part of our history and stuff? Sure, like every other country did. So slavery was a part of wealth, right? And so when Lincoln was actually talking to the different 13 states at the time, right? And there were going to be 14. There was either 12 or 13. There was going to be 14. I think the 13th original colonies. And basically they were all talking, 1860, right before the Civil War and stuff. And he's like talking to all the states, and they're like, yeah, slavery is morally wrong. And they're like, nah, it's not. And so basically he left it up to the states to decide if they wanted to have slavery or not. He didn't actually even outlaw slavery. That's what I think people don't really understand. And the Civil War that happened after he got assassinated, right? It's kind of interesting because Lincoln's looked at as the #1 favorable president in our history. And unfortunately, he had to die for that. He had to get martyred. And what was he going for? He was going for the idea that America is a place that takes all the diversified people from around the world and tries to give them the most fair opportunity to be part of this democratic republic, part of this new idea, part of this new form of government that we really have no idea what it is yet. But it seems like people from around the world keep on coming here because they enjoy American culture, American comedy, American rock and roll music, American innovation, American style from New York and California. We have things that people desire here: opportunity, So wealth should be opportunity, right? So we move ahead, cattle was interest, and then, coins, and then paper, and then I don't have enough, so let's get paper wealth in here. And then what happened? We had the Great Depression around 1929 or so, and from what I read in the book also, it was caused by the banks basically loaning huge amounts of money to agriculturists and farmers to get loans to get new equipment and stuff and to farm, because farming used to be 93% in America was farming. Now it's like 6% or something. So these farmers, got loans and stuff like this and that, and then Black Friday happened, right? And they're like, we got to get those loans back and stuff, and let's just take them back from all the farmers and the people that are working, even if they can't pay it. And so they took them all back, and the banks just thought, we'll just loan them to some other people that want to farm and stuff. And they figured out that farming's really hard. It's really, really, really hard, dusty, dry. You're up real early, you're there till real late. You got animals, they could die, they could get sick. You got a land, it may have poison in it. You got to irrigate it, you got to fertilize it, you got to get loans and subsidies, you got to fight other people around you, you got to put up fences, you got to put in pipes. So we had the Great Depression, right? And then after that, in 1933, Franklin Delano Roosevelt decided to issue Order 6102 to confiscate America's gold. Because at that time we were on the gold system, right? That our gold was our money was supposedly still backed by gold. And from what I understand, JP Morgan basically got all the gold in the world, which was something like maybe 30 billion, and expanded it right away with fractional reserve banking to like 300 billion, and kind of created the debt system that we're still in today. People realize, why are we in $37 trillion debt? We've been in debt ever since we went out of money which was backed by some kind of liquid asset. It was actually had some sort of value to it, right? Some of the earliest monetary symbols, or actually that were used, was seeds, bean seeds, or corn seeds, because they'd actually grow into something, and then they were actually had something intrinsically worth behind them. Now we just have the dollar, right? So let's go back. Sometimes I ramble. Let's go back to the gold confiscation. It was called, you can't hoard gold. Wow, hoard, you can't hoard gold. So people had an ounce of gold, they were forced to give it back to the government for $20 an ounce. And then the government raised it to $30 an ounce because they thought that would change the allocation of the Federal Monetary International Exchange or something, and raise the economy for the American people. But it did the exact opposite. And why wouldn't it? You took the individual's actual gold, which was worth something, that could be traded for something, and you said they couldn't hoard it because you wanted to increase the American dollar around the world. And so you gave people dollars for the gold. So you'd give them an ounce of gold and they would give you $20, right? Which was worth about $1,000 today or something in the gold. And you could, I think they said you could keep like 6 ounces or something. Real nice of them, huh? But actually people were put in jail, and people, different jewelers and stuff had scraps of gold in there, they put them in jail. And $10,000 fine back then is like $250,000 fine, in jail for 10 years for hoarding your own wealth. So it kind of did the opposite, right? They gave everybody less money in American dollars than was worth for their actual physical gold, and expected this to improve the gold market somehow. And people are like, oh, that's fine, I guess so, we got to do it, otherwise we go to jail. And then they figured that it did the exact opposite. It destroyed America for the next 50 years. And we haven't barely recovered since, right? So from the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, what were they doing in between that time, right? Because we were off the gold standards because people couldn't have gold, right? They couldn't hoard it. And so in the 70s, we went off the oil standard even. Nixon signed, this agreement where now we're off the petrodollar, right? And now the dollar's backed by oil, not by gold anymore. But now we're not backed by oil or gold. And the dollar's backed by the faith in the government, or our big guns, right? And that's the problem, is that America is now, unfortunately, a world authoritarian sort of bully. And that's what people don't really like, is that I would say probably 90%, if not all the wars that we've been in, have been instigated by us, unfortunately. Whether it's the Afghanistan war for 20 years, the disgusting, horrible Vietnam War that we were in for maybe 10 or 15, probably more than we even thought, because the French Indochina then traded it off to us, and we're like, we got some weapons and bombs, we got to try them out over there, let's make an enemy. And then we lied about how long it was going on, and then gave all of our soldiers this horrible diseases and addictions, and then when they came back, they were baby killers, and all lying about the war. That was the last time that the media was allowed in wars without the military to actually go through and to filter it and to censor it. Because they saw that the power of the media, the kids running around, with their skin falling off and stuff, and people shooting people in the head and stuff, they say, this isn't good, it's not good media. And they figured that, this war was all done for American military, basically, to keep its military up and to keep our enemies. So we always have to have an enemy, right? And then we had World War I, right, who was at the time Stalin and Japan, and Japan was number 2. Sorry, I get the confused 1 and 2. So I think 1 was like Stalin and Mussolini, right? And number 2 was Japan and Hitler. And then after that with Vietnam, and then we had, Korea, and then we had like Afghanistan, and then we had, 9/11, which terrorized all of Iraq and Iran and the whole Middle East, and now we have, Iran and Iraq and Gaza and Palestine. I never seen any of these people really hurt America or cause the price of my, food to change from, $2 or $3 for a carton of eggs up to $15 now. I never seen Iraq have a problem with creating, music or political discourse or writing that tried to topple the American governor or provide propaganda like the FBI and CIA have done, assassinating Martin Luther King and assassinations of, Gandhi, and all the people who do something good get assassinated, right? JFK assassinated because he tried to get rid of the Federal Reserve. Lincoln got assassinated, tried to get rid of the money and introduce greenbacks. Same thing that you can't get rid of the Federal Reserve, right? The Federal Reserve was created in 1913 as a separate institution for America. Most people think Federal Reserve, right? That's part of the government. Pretty good name, nice little trick they played on everybody, but unfortunately it's not. The Federal Reserve was created in 1913 as a set of private bankers to loan out money to the American mint and to the American people so they could make more money for themselves, right? And unfortunately, Woodrow Wilson at the time was kind of co-opted into it. They think they might have even had some sort of sexual misconduct on them or something, like the same thing they have now with all the Epstein stuff, or with Clinton with the whole blowjob, and they used $30 million to try to track it down for this and that. It's like, people like sex and money, guys. That's what they always like, and that's what they're gonna like. And unfortunately, Woodrow Wilson said that was the worst injustice he ever did to the American people, to basically make us slaves to a private institution that dictates the interest rates of the banks and how much they'll mint and how much they can get and when they can get it. And if you try to get rid of it, you get your head blown off. So one of the solutions that I'm trying to do and not get my head blown off is to institute a Colorado coin. And that's one of the solutions I have to talking about this wealth. People are like, this is all the problems about wealth and interest, and bankers suck and lawyers suck and accountants suck and everybody sucks. Everybody doesn't suck. It's just natural to want more. But what about wanting more grace, wanting more health, wanting more community, wanting more skills, wanting more creativity, wanting more interaction with your friends and family that's positive? You can want more of things, you just don't always have to be greedy. I think if you're greedy, it's saying that you don't really appreciate what you already have. You can be greedy and have a penny or $1 or $10 million. Or you can be grateful and have a penny, $1 or $10 million. So the idea of the Colorado coin would be that it would improve the Colorado economy and help to lessen our dependence on the federal government, because we seem to have a big problem, especially right now, with everything that's going on in politics, and people think they're abusing the power and that they're trying to create all this kingship and everything. And the person who confiscated our gold was the only president, FDR, that actually had 3 terms, and he's one of the most respected and prestigious presidents of our time too. So it's interesting how things change over time and how they're looked at, during the present time. We always think, I would have done better. I would have done different. I wouldn't have had slavery. I wouldn't have sold the people into it. I wouldn't have made the Federal Reserve like Woodrow Wilson. I wouldn't have done Citibank like Obama and bankrupt the country, the Goldman and Sachs, or the Bernie Madoff, and took him $50 billion. And all the bankers got hundreds of millions of dollars in bonuses, and people were put on the street, and there's hundreds of thousands of people without homes. I wouldn't have done that. But we don't know. We don't know what we do until we do it. And that's why they say vanity and pride is sort of one of those final challenges that we have to overcome, because we all want to be right. We all want to be loved. We all want to be intelligent and creative and healthy and fit and sexy and fun. Not everybody is, but we all want that, right? So the Colorado coin would be tied directly to air rights, to water rights, to mineral rights, to geothermal. Like there's this new really cool geothermal section they just found up north near Wyoming, and that's one of the most cleanest ways to capture energy. Just heat comes out of the ground, you put it in a turbine, and then send it off to the electric rails to everybody. You know, all those Tesla cars that everyone thinks are so carbon friendly with their 900-pound lithium batteries that has to be extracted out of the ground by little kids over in China and Africa usually and stuff. China I think too has a bunch of lithium. They call it white gold, and then there's no way to get rid of the batteries. And every time you charge in your Tesla car, the other end of that cable goes to a coal plant or to a natural gas plant or to a hydroelectric dam or to this geothermal or to solar or wind, right? So it has to get energy from somewhere. Most of our energy, from what I understand, still comes from coal and like fracking and oil and stuff like that. The solar power we have around here, a lot of it is about, from what I've read, 8 to like 14% as effective. The most effective ones, I think they kind of like heat it up as a steam, so they get the steam, which is like a little bit of an extra energy source, and they get the sun photon into it. We still haven't learned how to really capture it yet. There's other ideas that we call blue and green power, and those are basically where you are using the 100% most effective and most efficient means of power necessary, so you have less waste, less pollution, more efficiency, and that would increase everybody's pocketbook if you didn't have to spend every month $100 on your gas bill and $100 on your water bill, and $100 on this over the year. Why you just save $2,500 on just 2 items that were made more efficient, so you didn't have to lose that. So over 10 years you save $25,000. Buy yourself a new car, So this is one thing, and then the other thing is even tied to like gold and like silver, because those are in the ground around here, right? The big gold rush in the mountains, and everybody came over to Colorado and they just got all the gold out for themselves and left. Well, this would be sort of like a dividend that it's your birthright if you live in Colorado, that you are gilded these Colorado coins, and the coins are tied to natural resources, carbon sequestration, rainwater capture, proper organic fertilization and crop rotation, so you're not poisoning the earth with poisonous fertilizers. Interactions with animals and agriculture, so it creates that symbiotic connection, so you don't actually need to truck in a bunch of fertilizer, because you have pigs and horses and cows and stuff that have natural fertilizer that comes out, and then you make money off the animals too. You move them around so they don't overgraze on an area, right, and just destroy it. And then they move around and you do it correctly. Maybe you don't make quite as much money, but you also don't have people who have all kinds of cancers and kids with birth defects because you pour Roundup all around your house. Come on, guys. It's common sense. But that's that profit, right? What is the money really worth if you're not healthy, or you have no purpose, or you have no community, you have no faith, right? That whole saying that if you gain the world and lose yourself, what have you gained? Not much. And that's the reason I think that we have so much mental illness in this country, so much political division, so much possible chance of the civil wars and this and that kind of stuff, is that people don't feel like they have the value or the resources that America supposedly has. We have the biggest wealth distribution and inequality of biggest wealth inequality of any place in the world. Like 1% or less than 1%, it's like 0.001% own 90% of the wealth. It's not because they were smarter or better people. They had the money given to them. They had the loans given to them. The banks worked with them. They had the subsidies. They had the different understandings of economics at the time. When I went, this was just in community college even, back in the 90s. In community college, I went to Whatcom Community College, and my economics professor, I was asking these questions, about fractional reserve banking and, usury and interest rates, and how people at the bottom keep going down lower and lower and lower, and the people at the top. And he's like, well, let me tell you something, guys. The system of economics that you're taught, that you just pull yourself up by your bootstraps and those who work hard get to the top, is 100% bullshit. Now, do some people that work hard get to the top? Sure. Some people that start out with nothing get to the top, Sure, we have those stories. We have the Michael Jacksons and the Oprahs, and the Obamas, people that come from nothing and they go to everything, right? But that's not everybody, and it's probably a lot less the more that we're getting onto it, right? So, The Colorado coin's an awesome thing because I think it would increase the loyalty to our communities and to our state, which I believe the states should just basically have most of the rights and the legislation and the communication to interact with its citizens. The federal government doesn't do that much for the states, so let's keep the federal government doing the least it can, right? Protecting our borders, stuff like that, protecting the international stuff, right? Protecting the economy federally, but not overreaching its arms into every little thing, right? Like when I'm running for office now, I'm learning that the federal government gets tax money from every single candidate that raises money for the campaign. I can see why people don't want the government part of their life anymore, because this has nothing to do with the federal government. The governor deals with the state. Of course they deal with the federal too, right? But their job is to deal with the state and to find out if proper laws are going in, to find out if people feel valued, to find out if there's riots in the street or we have a sanctuary city and who's that sanctuary actually protecting. You know, this is the kind of stuff, civil rights. Businesses, are they actually treating their employees correctly? Do we need to understand what is minimum wage? What is the standard of living? And what is the idea of making this democratic playing field the most suitable and efficient for everyone so we can live up to our creed, that America is the land of opportunity, that it is the land of freedom, that it is the land of beauty and wonder and creation. And so that's why I try to practice the idea that I actually envision America, and I envision giving it my love and giving it my grace and saying thank you very much for being able to be born in this beautiful country with such amazing people that are inspired by the same vision to make a better world, to make a better country, to make a better place. And unfortunately, I know a lot of people are going, this is stupid, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, I was never interested in politics because I was so turned off to the corruption that it was, everybody was corrupt, 100% of them. Okay, maybe 90%, 99%. We even saw Bernie Sanders, right? We thought he was for the people, and then he got co-opted as they threw Hillary in there and didn't even back him. We don't have to get into too much of it, but the system is sort of like FDR, right? And his vanity and his sorry, not FDR, but TR, Teddy Roosevelt. His pride kind of got in front of him because after he ran 2 terms, he said he'd never run another term, but then he got bored and wanted to go back into government. He was good at government, so he started a new party, right? The Progressive Party. But doing that fractured the Democratic vote. They lost the Senate and the House, and they were pretty pissed at TR. So that's that vanity, that's that ego, right? And is what's good for the goose good for the gander? And I always didn't really know that. I'm like, Mom, what does that mean? What's good for the goose is good for the gander. I didn't know what a gander is. I think what it means is what's good for one person is good for the other person. And that's the idea that we have this thing, you know, in the 80s, trickle down effect with Reaganomics, and everything we've heard from the government, unfortunately, are basically all lies, you know? And that's why I didn't want to get into the government, because I was sick of being around this toxicity and these lies. But deep down in my heart, I have so much respect and so much appreciation and so much gratitude for Mother America and for what she represents. And I've traveled the world, and I've heard people talk positive and talk negative about America, and it's usually whoever's in politics at that time and what personality they vibe with. But I have heard people that are like, oh, American soldiers dropped things off to me and they helped us afterwards and this and that. And it's kind of like we're the best of and the worst of both worlds, right? Like during World War II, we bombed, you know, China, or not, sorry, it was China, bombed Japan, right, to basically show Russia and this and that. The first one was for Japan. The second one was for Russia to say, hey guys, back off, you know, because we got some stuff that you don't quite have yet. And where was I going with that? Well, I guess where I was going is that we have the Cold War then for the next 40 years. And I read something that Russia doesn't even have a GDP that equals New York City. The whole continent of Russia, which is like, I don't know how big, but it's huge, doesn't even have the same GDP as New York City. New York, this stuff's from New York City. That old Pace Picante or something commercial, you know? And so that goes back to the fact that, does poverty create violence? Well, it definitely helps, yeah. You don't see people when they have all their needs met and taken care of trying to go out and hurt other people or steal from other people as much, unless you get the government, right? And all the big corporations and CEOs and stuff, because they just get sick. They got these syncopaths that are just like telling them, and all these little yes men around them, and they're just like, yeah, greed is good, you know, Wall Street is good, blah, blah, blah. Do you guys even know what Wall Street is? Nobody really knows. I don't know. All I know is it's some kind of place where a couple people make a lot more money and then other people basically don't make any money. Except for the GameStoppers. I did like that movie where the GameStoppers figured it out. And that's Wall Street, is you can actually bet on a company to do better, right? Or you can bet on a company that you call short the company. The company's gonna go down. That's a little bit, I understand it, but it's kind of like, can't we all just try to motivate ourselves to make the most efficient, most valuable, most quality companies, whatever it is that we're creating, so we don't have to keep on going forward and going backward and going forward and going backward. And we put a bunch of this Roundup and a bunch of mercury and a bunch of uranium in the ground now, and all these people are sick and dying and getting birth defects and cancers. I'm gonna go ahead and start a commission. I sign a commission. That's what Polis and his cabinet just did. They all signed all these commissions to study the soil where people are getting mutated and sick from uranium and from excess. There's right over here, right outside my window, I can see the mine. It's the old Allied gold mine and silver mine that was built on top of a sacred Indian burial ground. So unfortunately, after 2 years, everything stopped working. What happened? But all the settling ponds and everything else that they used, all those volatile chemicals and everything, just sink down into the earth. And then people all around there were starting to get sick, and now it's actually radioactive. Go there with a Geiger counter. You can feel it and hear it. But now they're just going to have commissions and stuff and this and that to study it. And the city owns it for $25 million, but they actually don't want to do the real cleanup, so it's just sitting over there. And there's a really cool graveyard right by it with all these Civil War people, veterans that died in there, these people that are right alongside the Ute Indians and the Comanche and the Arapaho, the Hopi, all these different people working together at the land. And sure, they were fighting and stuff and this and that, and it's not necessarily the prettiest picture, but this is a sacred burial ground over there. So when you take something that's sacred, like the earth, and you destroy it for monetary purposes, sometimes there's a bigger hand that's acting out there, and that's the hand, whatever it is. So that's why I believe that you really have to get character before commerce. There's nothing people hate more than when you get a rich, arrogant kid walking your place, and you go, oh my God, this kid had never worked for anything in his life. He's always had everything given to him, so he has zero understanding of the world. And unless you're like Teddy Roosevelt, who grew up very affluent too, and then was basically kind of tricked or forced or whatever, went with his buddy to check out the slums, he never would have known. But then he was a person who grew up, bullied and stuff too, and had really bad health, so he ended up sticking up for the little guy and saw how horrible it was, and still got into civics and stuff, and did the Panama Canal, and made us a national country, improved the working conditions, and did a lot of amazing stuff. So there are people that really do want to make this country great. And I think it's a lot of you out there. I think it's most of you. I think it's all of you. Everybody wants to make the country better in the way that they see. And the wealth and the finance is a very hard thing because it destroys people. If you don't have money to pay your bills or to pay your food, to pay your phone bill, it creates a lot of disease, a lot of depression, a lot of anxiety, a lot of just nasty behavior. Nobody's motivated, nobody's loyal, nobody's patriotic, nobody's excited, no one has a purpose. If you're just going to a job to make a little bit of money, and they've done studies that people that work at their jobs work maybe 20 to 40% of the time, then the jobs aren't efficient, and then they're not going to do as good of a job, and then they're not going to get as good of money, and then the money starts to lose value, and then the community starts to lose value, and then the government starts to lose value, and then we got to start more wars. So the Colorado coin would solve that by directly tying in every Colorado citizen into the natural environment that they live in, so that they increase the water stability and purification, that they rejuvenate the land and the soil, that they are aware of the purity and the blessings of being able to breathe air in and not have to be in like Mexico and stuff and have to buy oxygen because you didn't understand the infrastructure. America has clean water that comes out of most of its faucets and bathrooms. If you go around the world, I don't know any other country, not one other country in the world. Sure, they might have state parts of it, but not one other country in the world where they have simple, clean water coming out of the faucet that you can drink and not die or get horrible intestinal bacteria and stuff. Hey, can I drink some of that water? Hey, don't drink that, don't drink that. What do you mean, don't drink that? Don't drink out of the faucet. Okay, I'll just drink over here out of this hose. No, don't drink out of the hose. Don't drink out of the faucet. Okay, I'll go drink out of the water fountain, the drinking fountain. No, don't drink out of the... I can't drink any water in the whole country? Why is that? Well, probably something to do with money, right? Wealth. People didn't want to get together and go, oh, sanitation and health are important to us, so we're going to put in the infrastructure, we're going to put in the pipes and the plumbing to do that and make that a number one reason to have healthy people that have healthy bodies that can drink a simple water that comes out of the faucet. So that's why I'm really excited to get the Colorado coin in there. And we already have the technology. So it's basically, asset-backed decentralized currency. And we already have that with the crypto coins out there. And like I was talking before, Utah and Texas, I was reading, just have a coin now that's tied to gold and silver. And you can just basically exchange it anytime you want for gold or silver. And there's the technology online now with all the different websites and the PayPals and the Anadots and the Novas and the Stripes and all these different programs where all your money from your debit card to your check to your silver to your gold, this would all be tied to the Colorado coin. You can use it for resources. You can use it to buy gas. You can use it to pay your bills. You can use it to get groceries. You can tie it to kilowatt hours and have that be part of it. Have oil and geothermal and wind and solar all be part of the coin, because everywhere around the world, people need electricity. Electricity is ubiquitous, especially for the crypto coin industry. Electricity is the number one thing they're doing, right? I don't understand anything about it, but from what I get, the crypto coins are mining something, the original ones, the Bitcoins, right? They have these giant factory warehouses which they mine these certain puzzles or programs, and when they figure their programs out, they get more coins. To me, it sounds like AI basically just using humanity to become their total bitch and take us over because they know how much we like greed and money. And they're like, yeah, we don't need to know the main guy, Mokuyato Sotiasho or something. But when I did a name search for it, it basically said golden man with a big glass eye behind the screen that takes all your money. It sounded to me like the CIA, but don't tell anyone, because I want to keep my head on my shoulders. Head and shoulders. So you guys let me know what you think about the Colorado coin, tied to the air quality and the land resources and the water rights and the mineral rights, the oil rights, the geothermal rights. Don't you think this would allow people to become more fiscally responsible, more efficient, more effective, more valuable citizens, stewards of the environment? You don't have to force them and make laws that protect the environment if your body and your health and your economy is directly already tied to that environment. That's why I'm not really for creating more and more laws. And people ask me the other day, what do you think about unions and stuff? Well, to me, unions basically came around because businesses weren't treating their employees fairly. So just treat your employees fairly. It's the same thing with immigration or migration or whatever. It's the businesses that are taking advantage of the cheap labor and then creating a sense of division and racism. And they're the only ones that are benefiting from it. Does it trickle down? Not too much. And then they sit there like they're self-righteous and stuff. Oh, people are racist. You're creating the racism by creating an economic divide, by hiring people that aren't even from this country and don't even speak the language. So you can make more money and save money, and then you put it off on the rest of the American workers that they either don't want to do the jobs, Americans don't work anymore. And why don't they work anymore? Is it just all Americans are just lazy, stupid people? Or is it part of the responsibility of the business and the worker to work together, right? That's why they found out that businesses that actually allow their workers to own part of the business, they show up way more happy, excited, and do a way better job. Just like they show that employees who are healthy show up and do a lot better job. I know, common sense, right? But people don't think about that. And then people sacrifice their health so they can get more wealth, and then they spend all that wealth to try to get back their health, and then they go bankrupt. Right? Number one reason for bankruptcy in the US, medical. So that's the whole idea with the health and wellness that we talked about in the last episode, is that economy and wealth is directly tied into healthcare, because you spend all your money on it. If you right? We spend 30% of our money in Colorado on healthcare, and we have the worst ranked healthcare in the nation, 50th. Why is that? It's a breakdown. I don't know. It's a breakdown of the system. How do you guys enjoy your times waiting for prescriptions to get filled, or interacting with your doctor, or getting actual advice that's actually credible? You don't have to go look it up and make sure, they didn't give me some poison to stick in my arm that I got, this or that, or they gave me a pill that gave me Parkinson's later or something, or I went blind like this, or my buddy like Isaiah took the second booster and the whole half of the side is now paralyzed because he had a stroke. So these are things that I've seen with my own eyes. So people, you're vaccine hesitant or resistant or skeptical. Yeah, I'm all those. I'm all that. I'm resistant, I'm skeptical, and I want to know what you think you're going to stick inside of me that has hurt other people. That's why they have those things. What was it called? Geneva Convention, I think it was, where basically you can't do medical experiments on people against their will. And they found that they did that. And like Tuskegee, I think, in Mississippi, I think, and there was this thing, Seascape, Operation Seascape in San Francisco, where the CIA, whoever, dropped a bunch of chemicals on people to see how they would react in it. All the Agent Orange and DDT all over, Vietnam, and then everyone gets diseases and gets sick and everything when they come back. So humans aren't very nice, unfortunately, right? And I can see why people get kind of depressed and kind of sick and kind of isolated and tired, and they just use drugs and alcohol and say, screw this system. I'm tired of dealing with these people who don't represent me, who are complete liars, and all they do is represent the special interests or the lobbyists that got them into office. And that's why I feel confident with your help, we can actually change that system, and I can become the first independent governor elected in Colorado's history with your help. I don't have millions of dollars, but millions of dollars help elections, but votes win elections. You win elections with your ideas, with your support. So I want to come and hang out in your towns and your counties. I want to talk about how we can get these wellness centers built, how we can get the Colorado coin up and operating so people can start using it right away, and how we can start having conversations that reintegrate that sense of patriotism, that sense of loyalty, that sense of being a steward of our land, for our families and for our communities and for ourselves. You do it for yourself. Everything you do for yourself, even if it's so-called altruistic or philanthropic, or you're going out there to help some Congo people or something, or you're going to go do microcredit loans and give people a little bit of leg up. It's all for yourself because you want to do that. Even giving money to people on the street, right? The homeless or whatever. You do it because you want to do it. It's not because they want to do it. They're sitting there with the sign. There's 50 people with signs. Which one do you want to give it to? It's fine to give it to them, but it doesn't change their situation, right? It's like teach a man to fish or give a man a fish. We need to be teaching people to fish because that creates this huge deficit in the economy. Also, if we want to talk about wealth, is the sense that people who can't get homes and are on the street, those people are actually making money for people. People go, oh, that's so sad, they don't have any money. They actually got a lot of money, unfortunately. Maybe not in their bank account, but all the social programs that they're on, the food stamps and the debit cards and the housing assistance, all this kind of stuff, it makes something like $50,000 to $70,000 per homeless person. And don't get me wrong, I've struggled with my economics my whole life. I was even homeless, a couple times here and there, and even my mom after the divorce and stuff. But this is not the reason, is that these people aren't trying. They're put into a system where they're basically taken advantage of by these so-called ethical businesses that want to help them. But if you're just giving them a little food all the time, or you're just giving them, just this clean needles or this and that, or just Suboxone or methadone for heroin, you're not talking about the actual addiction of it and what it does to the body, it's better now, then people don't really know what's going on. You don't talk about how much money is being used and actually stolen from different immigrants or migrants, and how many cards and how many bank accounts and how many places they're living. And this creates the resentment, because if it is supposed to be an even playing field, then everybody in America should have the even playing field. There should be no such thing as migrant workers. To me, that sounds like just another word for slavery. We got these migrant workers here. Really? You got migrant workers? How much you pay them? Not as much as we pay the regular people. Not as much as you pay the regular people who live there. So does this create unity and strength and loyalty and improves the economy for everyone? Or does it create division and weaken the family and weaken the connection and create racism and create political propaganda that each side can use to destroy people in the middle and have them keep fighting? You figure it out. But thank you so much for checking out this episode of the Colorado Coin and electing Jon Collamer. Remember to vote Jon Collamer, 2026 Colorado governor. And we're going to be making history and re-inviting that enthusiasm that in America anything is possible. And I think this candidacy represents that I'm coming from a position of not a typical politician. I grew up in bands, I grew up playing music, I grew up writing, I grew up working in schools, I grew up doing video and music production and being brand ambassadors, and I was on television, which made me, I can't talk about that or I'll go to jail, but under $2,000. And it made the company $5 to $10 million. So that's just the other thing. I didn't do it either. It was for adventure and for fun. But that's just the idea, is that people, unfortunately, kindness is not rewarded, really, right? Kindness is its own reward. Patience is its own reward, And my dad used to say, if patience is a virtue and virtue is its own reward, then patience must be its own reward. Or patience must be a virtue, and it's true. And people think patience is easy, but it's actually one of the hardest things. Look, next time you're in a line somewhere or something, people have to wait 1 or 2 minutes, they flip out of their mind because we all want it right now, right here, that instant gratification. And that's unfortunately why we have some of the challenges and the situations that we're dealing with. But I'm super excited about the Colorado coin. So go ahead and email me. Go to collamerforcolorado.com. That's collamerforcolorado.com. And we can get your volunteering there. You can go ahead and donate to the campaign. Check out some of my policies, some of the other stuff I'm talking about for healthcare, and how we can improve this community in Colorado and be a leader in the national wellness and healthcare and economy and all kinds of stuff. So I'm really excited, and I look forward to meeting you guys out there. I'm gonna start getting a lot more involved in the public and going to different congressional districts and just having really fun talking to you guys to see what you think we need and what's most important to you. So thank you very much for checking out this episode of the Colorado Coin and electing Jon Collamer to the gubernatorial seat in 2026. Have a wonderful day.